In this video, we're explaining the entire life of Invincible in around 19 minutes or less. To start things off, 20 years ago, an alien called Nolan landed on Earth where he encountered a human called Debbie. After starting a relationship, Debbie eventually gave birth to Mark Grayson, who was the first ever hybrid between a human and a Viltrumite. For context, Viltrumites are a highly advanced alien race who can fly, have super strength, and also live for thousands of years. From a young age, Mark was told that Viltrumites use their powers to help less developed planets, explaining why his dad came to Earth in the first place. For 2 decades, Nolan had been the famous hero known as Omni-Man, and at the age of 17, Mark finally got powers as well. Wanting to be like his dad, Mark went on a couple of missions by himself, which leads to him meeting Atom Eve. Eve's power allows her to change atoms in any way she wants, but usually it only works on non-living things. At the time, she was part of a small hero group known as Teen Team, but probably the strongest hero group were the Guardians of the Globe. Although Nolan wasn't officially a member, he'd worked with the Guardians for nearly 20 years and considered some of them to be close friends. Unfortunately, the same week Mark got his powers, the Guardians were all massacred by an unknown villain. To make things worse, Omni-Man was put in a coma during the incident, and when he woke up, he wasn't sure who attacked them. Over the next few weeks and months, the Guardians' murder was investigated by the GDA, which is a secret organization led by Cecil. Cecil's job is to protect the Earth using any methods available, and with the Guardians being dead, he had to rely on newer heroes like Invincible. In particular, Cecil sent Mark on missions to space, on Mars, and across the country, making it super hard for him to maintain a personal life. As a result, he gets dumped by his girlfriend after 5 months, but before he has time to process this, his dad gets attacked by a Kaiju on the same day. This monster was actually strong enough to kill a Viltrumite, so Invincible flies in to help out. As they fight the Kaiju, Omni-Man reveals that Cecil sent this monster on purpose, which from Mark's perspective didn't make any sense. To make things even more confusing, a hero called the Immortal then flies in, but instead of attacking the Kaiju, he attacks Nolan. In response, Omni-Man kills him in front of the world, and this is when Mark learns the truth about his dad. In reality, Viltrumites are a violent race of warriors whose only goal is to conquer as many planets as possible. Nolan was sent to Earth specifically to weaken the planet's defenses, but also to protect it from anyone else who might want to take over, and the idea was that in time, the Viltrum Empire would take Earth for themselves. When Mark's powers kicked in, it reminded Omni-Man why he was really here, hence why he murdered the Guardians of the Globe. Cecil figured this out, which is why he sent the Kaiju, but now that it was dead, the GDA had nothing that could beat Nolan. Having been raised as a human, Mark tries to stop his dad, but in the process gets beaten nearly to death, not to mention their fight kills a lot of innocent people. In normal circumstances, a true Viltrumite would have killed Mark in this scene, but life on this planet had made Nolan soft to the point where he runs away rather than finishing his mission. Having said that, in this series there are infinite different timelines, and in most of them, Mark and Nolan work together to conquer the Earth. This fact was discovered by a scientist called Angstrom Levy, whose power lets him travel to any timeline he wants. Angstrom's goal was to help the planet by using this machine to combine knowledge from all the different dimensions. However, on the day of this experiment, Mark was sent by Cecil to just stop whatever was going on, leading to an explosion that left Angstrom looking not the best. Pretty soon, the scientist began plotting his revenge, while Invincible was on his way to another planet. By this point, it had been 6 months since his dad nearly killed him, and in that time he started university, but was then approached by these aliens who needed help. After arriving on their planet, Mark was shocked to see that Nolan was the Emperor, and that he already had a new son. This baby was half Viltrumite and half Thraxan, who are a race of bug people that age super quickly. Usually, Viltrumites aren't allowed to make children like this, which is why Nolan needed Mark's help to protect him from the Empire. After their fight, Omni-Man realized just how much life on Earth had changed him, and he now actually cared about other people, including all of the Thraxans. Although Mark was conflicted, he does still lend a hand, and fights with his dad against 3 Viltrumites that show up. By the end, Nolan is captured by the Empire, while an injured Mark is basically given Nolan's mission and told to prepare Earth for a Viltrumite takeover. 2 months later, Invincible then returns home with his brother, who tagged along since his Thraxan mum was about to die of old age. A shocked Debbie agrees to raise the child so that Mark doesn't quit school, and she names him Oliver after her own dad. Pretty soon though, they both get held hostage by Angstrom Levy, who return to this timeline to get revenge. In the battle that followed, Mark and Angstrom fight across multiple different dimensions, and Invincible accidentally kills him. With Angstrom dead, this meant there was no way to get back home, but luckily he gets saved by a future version of Atom Eve and a few other heroes as well. In their timeline, which is technically his timeline as well, Mark got stranded here forever, but now that they had the right tech, they traveled back in time to save him. However, before he goes home, future Eve tells him that she's always been in love with him. When he arrives back, Mark quits college to focus on being a hero full time, and he trains with the GDA to become physically stronger. During this time, his strength increases by 138%, but his relationship with Cecil breaks down over a moral disagreement. From Cecil's perspective, the GDA has to protect Earth using basically anyone they can, even if that means sometimes working with villains. From Invincible's point of view, murderers should stay locked up in jail, and their disagreement escalates into a full-blown battle. It turns out, Cecil put a device in Mark's head to weaken him at times like this, but Invincible gets saved by the new Guardians of the Globe. Following this, Invincible becomes an independent hero and finally starts a relationship with Eve. At the same time, Oliver gets his powers at a super young age, especially compared to Mark, with Invincible training him on how to use them. Unlike his brother, Oliver had no problem killing villains. In fact, he thought it was a good thing, since it technically means they can never hurt people again. Mark, on the other hand, believed that jail was by far the best option, but his opinion began to change shortly after the Invincible War. This war is when over a dozen versions of Mark from other timelines came to this dimension, and for 3 days destroyed every major city on Earth. The mastermind of this attack was Angstrom Levy, who was not dead, and on the third day, he and Invincible came face to face. Once again, Mark hesitates to kill him and doesn't finish the job, which allows Angstrom to quickly escape to another dimension. As if this somehow wasn't enough, the next day a Viltrumite named Conquest arrived on Earth. Conquest is a warrior with even more experience than Nolan, and his ultimate goal was to see if Mark had made progress on the mission that they gave him. Obviously, he hadn't done that, and so the older Viltrumite gave him a beatdown on a comparable level to Omni-Man. Throughout the fight, Conquest also broke Oliver's arm and basically killed Eve, leaving her on the verge of death. In rare situations like this, Eve can briefly overcome the limits of her power and use her abilities on living things. That's why she was able to rebuild her body back to perfect health and then severely mess up Conquest. Mark then takes advantage by headbutting the Viltrumite dozens of times, seemingly putting an end to his life. In a conversation with Oliver, Mark admits that he's been wrong this whole time and that in the future he won't hesitate to kill. This was proven when Earth got invaded by massacreds, who are these creatures that can take over people's minds. To stop them, Invincible killed an innocent man who was under massacred control, and although he did technically save the day, certain people thought there was another way to win. On his next mission, he then nearly kills a villain named Titan, who's someone he's actually been friendly with in the past, but was stopped at the last second when Cecil intervened. At this point, Mark began to question again when exactly killing is justified, and to clear his mind, he switched back to his original hero costume. Surprisingly, the day he wore this costume home is the day that Omni-Man returned to Earth. For context, Conquest had told Mark that Nolan was dead, but in reality he'd escaped from Viltrumite jail with help from Alan the Alien. Alan works for an organization called the Coalition of Planets, which is the only group in the universe resisting the Viltrumites. Since escaping jail, Nolan helped the Coalition to gather allies and weapons to fight the Empire, and he revealed that there are less than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites left in the entire universe. Decades ago, the planet Viltrum lost 99.9% of its population to a disease called the Scourge virus, but this was a closely guarded secret. Even Thetis, the leader of the Coalition, didn't know things were this bad, which is crazy because he's the one who made the virus all those years ago. With the Empire being this small, the Coalition had a genuine chance of victory, and so all that was left was to recruit Mark, Oliver, and a hero called Tech Jacket. For 10 months, they left Earth to fight in the Viltrumite War, where Invincible goes through probably the worst pain of his life. Firstly, it turns out that Conquest was still alive thanks to Cecil, and although Mark kills him again, his injuries are so bad that it takes over 3 months to recover. Secondly, the Graysons then join up with the Coalition of Planets, where they literally destroy Viltrum, as in actually blow up the planet itself. In response, Thetis gets decapitated by Thrag, who's the Viltrumite leader, but interestingly, he chooses to let Mark and Nolan live. With less than 40 Viltrumites left, Thrag thought these two might be useful, because with Viltrum now gone, he planned to move his people to Earth. His plan was to secretly stay there for thousands of years while rebuilding their population, and for now they didn't want to take over the planet to avoid a second war with the Coalition. It goes without saying that Mark hated this idea, but to prevent another war from breaking out, he does allow the Viltrumites to stay. In terms of his personal life, Mark finds out that 10 months ago Eve was pregnant, but she got rid of the baby since she didn't want to raise the child by herself, and it wasn't really a guaranteed thing that he was coming back. When it comes to his professional life, Invincible went back to being a hero, but eventually got tired of just punching villains. What Mark wanted was long-term solutions to fix the world, which is why he broke into the GDA and released a villain called Dinosaurus. Dinosaurus is a mass murderer who killed thousands of people when he blew up Las Vegas, but he's also a genius with genuine plans to stop climate change and overpopulation. By working together, Mark believed that he could keep him in line and stop him from doing anything crazy, while at the same time helping everyone. However, this decision would kill 1 million people. Before we get to that though, with Thetis being dead, Alan was now in charge of the coalition, and he wanted to finish off the Empire once and for all. His plan was to release a new and improved version of the Scourge virus on Earth, thereby killing the last bits of Thrag's team. Because Viltrumite DNA is similar to human DNA, there was a chance that mankind could also be wiped out as well. However, this is a chance that Alan and Oliver were willing to take. To put this in perspective, these two were willing to kill 8 billion humans just to kill around 40 Viltrumites. When they arrived on Earth, Invincible tried his best to stop them, but in the process he accidentally got shot in the face by Oliver with the Scourge virus. By the time he woke up, his powers had mostly disappeared, with no guarantee they'd ever come back, but at the very least he was still alive, since 99.9% of Viltrumites don't survive this. On top of that, he finds out that Thrag unsuccessfully tried to kill him in his sleep, but at the time no one had any idea why. As Mark then spent time recovering, Dinosaurus worked on a new project, without Invincible to keep him in line. The end result of this project was the country of Greenland getting blown up, and this was designed to create global floods that would reduce the worldwide population. Having recently got his powers back, Mark then kills Dinosaurus after making the villain realize that he's not helping humanity. As punishment for his role in freeing Dinosaurus, Invincible pretty much offers to go to jail, but instead Cecil hires him to work for the GDA. One person who disagreed with this decision was Robot, aka Rudy, aka Rex, who personally blamed Mark for everyone that died. Despite that, the two heroes do start working together again after another attack from Angstrom Levy. On this occasion, Angstrom held Eve as a hostage, and because she was pregnant for a second time, she couldn't use her powers. During this incident, Mark got sent again to the same timeline where he was stranded, but this time he met an alternate version of himself who had been stuck here since the Invincible War. Together, they both escaped when Angstrom opened a portal, and following that, Mohawk Mark forcefully took the scientist back to his own dimension. With Eve being pregnant, Invincible was paranoid that Angstrom might return, and so to check if he was actually dead, he got Robot to build a portal to Mohawk Mark's timeline. Even though Eve repeatedly warned him not to go, Mark ignored her, went anyway, and then got stranded there for 6 months. In this alternate dimension, Rex actually stranded him here on purpose, since he now saw Invincible as a threat to his own plans to dominate the world. To eventually get back home, Mark had to make a deal with the robot of this timeline, but when he finally made it, Eve breaks up with him for being so unreliable. As if that wasn't enough, the same day Invincible gets ambushed by a Viltrumite called Anissa. For context, way back when Mark had the Scourge virus, it was discovered that he's the grandson of the previous Viltrum Emperor. By rights, this meant the Grayson should be on the throne instead of Thrag, hence why Thrag tried and failed to murder him. Since then, Nolan replaced Thrag as the Viltrumite Emperor and encouraged them all to repopulate. Historically, Viltrumites chose their mating partners by force, and for Anissa, she wanted Mark, the son of the Emperor, to be her child's dad. I probably don't need to spell out what happened next, but it goes without saying that she overpowered him. Now, when Robot found out that Invincible returned, he had to speed up his plans for world domination. With an army of upgraded drones, he killed anyone who he thought might oppose him, including Cecil, Black Samson, and other Guardians of the Globe. By the end of this massacre, Rex made himself the new head of the GDA, and from behind the scenes, he ended wars, provided free healthcare, and basically turned Earth into a paradise. From Nolan's point of view, he was perfectly fine with this, but Mark just couldn't accept Rex being in charge, and so he and Eve left the planet along with their daughter Terra. Their destination was a place called Telescria, where Alan, Oliver, and the Coalition are based. At this time, the Coalition's main goal was to locate Thrag, who got exiled from the Viltrumites when Nolan became Emperor. When Mark arrived on Telescria, he made it clear he didn't want to risk his life, but when Thrag gets found, he does make an exception. On this mission, he arrives on the planet where Thrag was last seen, and while looking around, he gets sucked into a cave by this mysterious creature. To put it simply, this creature is basically God, or at least the closest thing to God that exists in this series, and it specifically chose Invincible to save the universe. By sending Mark back in time to when he was 17, with all of the knowledge that he has now, it gave Mark the chance to save millions upon millions of lives. According to the creature, this would restore balance to the universe, because there are many people who died in some of these catastrophes that would have changed the world. Of course, the downside is that Mark could never go back to his old life, but for the most part, Mark was willing to make this sacrifice. Having said that, one thing he just couldn't accept was living in a reality without Terra, and so he rejects the offer. The creatures weren't expecting this because they knew from Mark's life that he was a selfless person, and so almost as a punishment, they send Invincible 5 years into the future. In all that time, Terra had grown up without him, Eve had a relationship with someone else, Nolan and Rex had become best friends, and Thrag created an army of Thraxan Viltrumite hybrids. Naturally, this was all devastating and it pretty much destroyed Mark mentally, and he decided that he was done trying to be a hero. His only priority now was to catch up for lost time, which is why he goes to this secluded planet with his family. What they didn't know is how desperate Alan was to defeat Thrag, so desperate in fact that he betrayed them. For context, Alan wanted to add Invincible and the other Viltrumites to his army, but with Mark being officially retired, he couldn't make it happen. Therefore, he put things in motion so that Thrag knew Mark's location, hoping that the Graysons would escape and then, be motivated to join the fight. Unfortunately, when Thrag arrives with 2 of his kids, Oliver gets killed. Following that, Mark brutally decapitates one of Thrag's children before getting ripped in half himself. In this situation, because Eve was also on the verge of death, she was able to once again surpass her limits and heal herself and also Mark. Oliver didn't make it because he was just too far gone by that point, and just like Alan wanted, the Graysons joined the Coalition army. Thanks to a plan that Mark comes up with, they're able to lure Thrag's forces to Earth, where they were then joined by over 30 experienced Viltrumites, including General Krieg, Anissa, and a bunch of other people. By now, all of these Viltrumites had fully integrated to life on Earth, and they were a lot more similar to Nolan than they were to Thrag. During this huge war, there were obviously losses on both sides, but ultimately the Coalition does win when Mark tears out Thrag's throat on the surface of the sun. In the aftermath, Anissa and more importantly Nolan both die, and Omni-Man's final wish was for his son to lead the Viltrumites. More than that, he wanted Mark to transform them into something totally different from the savages they used to be. After seeing Mark's compassion, Thrag's children were also happy to follow him, since their dad pretty much just used them as human shields. These children helped Invincible to win a new war against Robot, and Rex himself started this fight after getting paranoid that Mark would attack him first. Despite their differences, Mark wanted to maintain the peace on Earth that Rex had created, hence why he put the Immortal in charge of Earth, with Rex's brain serving as an advisor. But importantly, even though his brain is in this tube, it has no access to the internet and it can't control any of the drones. For the Viltrumites, however, Invincible decided that they had to leave Earth because he planned to use their talents to help the rest of the universe. Anissa's 2 kids were the only ones who'd remain on Earth with her husband, and one of those kids was Marky. Marky, aka Marcus, is Mark's son, who he didn't know existed until Anissa died. Although Marky worshipped his dad and had a great relationship with Debbie, he resented the fact that Terra was obviously more loved and got to live with Mark while the Viltrumites went from planet to planet fixing the universe. In many ways, Invincible had turned the Empire into exactly what his dad said it was in those fake stories when he was growing up. Hundreds of years later, the Empire had brought peace and technology to countless civilizations, even helping to relocate entire species into brand new solar systems. In fact, they were so effective at bringing peace that the coalition of planets became pointless, leading to a brief war between Mark and Alan. This war caused a division between Terra and her dad, not to mention Marky kinda hated him as well, but since they lived for so long, there was time to work out these differences. Over the centuries, it also turned out that Eve can't die from old age, meaning that even when Invincible was ancient and had grey hair, his family still looked like they were in their 20s. At this point in the story, we don't know exactly how old Mark is, but based on the text you would assume it's 500 years, but it could be even longer than that. It could be over 1,000, because Thrag was thousands of years old and he always had like a nice haircut and no grey hairs. So yeah, maybe Mark is older than we think here. Maybe he could be 3,000, 4,000 years old. We really just don't know. With that said, that was the full life of Mark Grayson in around 19 minutes, and if you haven't seen it already, be sure to check out my other video explaining the 27 alternate versions of Mark. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.